Hi, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our anxiety and autism webinar. Hope you guys are all doing really awesome this evening. Great to see so many of you here on our live chat. Just to get us started while everybody's getting in, just wanted to let you know that tonight's webinar is a snapshot of what we run as our 9-week autism parenting program. I'm mentioning it here right now because I talk a lot. I talk quite fast during these webinars. I try to add as much information as I can into the webinars so that you can walk away with, tools and understandings that you can apply straight away without even having to do our autism program. But for those of you who are relating to the content, I do want you to know that there is something that you can do after this as well. So just while everybody's getting on board, I'll just do a quick overview of what that autism program entails. So it's a 9-week program, self-paced. We start with your mental health. We work on things like we understand autism, what's going on for your child, understanding masking, executive functioning, and how that can impact how autism presents. We look at meltdowns, shutdowns, anxiety, PDA, school avoidance, sibling rivalry, aggressive behaviours, things like that. We help you with emotional regulation, communication skills, de-escalation strategies. So the program is really comprehensive, and you're going to kind of get a snapshot of some of the information in this particular webinar. The 9-week program is 100% self-paced as well. So I will be talking a little bit about that at the end of the program, but just wanted to kind of give you a heads up. If you hear me talking really fast and you're kind of going, oh, I love all this information, but I want more, or I want to know, what my next steps are, then we do have something for you at the end of that. So basically a little bit of background on myself and the Parental Stress Centre. So we've been around since 2007. We focus on relieving parental stress, depression, anxiety. For the past 4 years specifically, we've worked exclusively with parents and carers of autistic children through the 9-week program that I just spoke about and counselling support. I myself am the founder at Jackie Hall. Sorry, I didn't even introduce myself. Please forgive me. I'm just yesterday I did a 17-hour flight from the USA, so I don't think I've quite come back down to Aussie land. So if I mix up my words, then this is why. But yes, I am Jackie Hall, founder of the Parental Stress Centre and our sister business, The Safe to Grow, which is for professionals. I am a qualified counsellor registered with the Australian Counselling Association. I have graduate certificate in education in autism as well. Worked in mental health for past 16 years. I think that's a little bit more now. Experience in trauma, anxiety, depression, personality disorders, eating disorders, drug and alcohol addictions. Worked in residential youth care with autistic children who obviously have complex backgrounds. I'm an EMDR therapist and author and mother of teenage sons myself. So a lot of diverse kind of background I can bring to, the autism community and helping you to kind of understand and help your child with some of the challenges that they may be facing. Okay, so let's get us started on the actual presentation now that we've gone through all of that. So some of the ways in which anxiety can present, it can be things like rituals and like routines that your child gets kind of fixated on, avoidance behaviours, meltdowns, perfectionism, so this kind of intensity about getting things right, demand avoidance, often known as PDA or EDA. We're going to be talking about that in this presentation. Aggressive behaviours, including self-harm. And just as I'm mentioning these, it can be good to kind of let us know in the chat, what some of these, if you're recognizing some of these behaviors and that it's actually associated with anxiety. So other behaviors can be like obsessive compulsive kind of behaviors, stimming behaviors, echolalia, anxiety, selective mutism, any one of those. But the interesting thing is that any of these kind of behaviors can also present just as a part of being autistic, but it's not necessarily anxiety related. So it's important to try to understand, how do you know it's anxiety related? How can you tell? So there are 3 crucial factors that we have identified that are always present in anxiety. And the first one is how your child is perceiving life. So if we look at perceptions. Everybody perceives, all humans perceive things the same in the same similar ways. We experience an event with the 5 senses: see it, hear it, touch it, taste it, smelling. Sensory information gets sent into the brain for evaluation. So the brain's essentially going, what is this? Have I seen it before? Do I have a reference point? Do I have an opinion? What do I do? And it's all about trying to ascertain whether this thing that I'm experiencing with the 5 senses is pleasurable or painful. Now, depending upon how your child is perceiving the situation will trigger their emotions and trigger their behaviors. The emotions are chemical responses to thought, because every time you have a thought, you release chemicals into the body, and that we become aware of those, and they are our emotions. Some children are not able to recognize their emotions, either due to age or due to something called alexithymia, which is a difficulty in being able to recognize or feel emotions or know what they are. But this chemical response is still the same. So they're still having sensations in the body that are triggered by how the brain is perceiving that situation, whether that's conscious or unconscious. And then it's the behavior is all about, what do I do in order to reinstate pleasure or further avoid pain? So when we look at these perceptions, we really need to understand that evaluation process and how is my child perceiving things in order for that behavior to be there in the first place. So we're always asking that question: why does this behavior make sense to this child? What must they be thinking in order to be feeling the way that they are, and in order to be behaving the way that they are? Because behavior is communication. So we're trying to understand what is the perception, and there's certain perceptions involved that trigger the anxiety response. So when we look at it, and I want to kind of step out of the world of your child for a minute, and I want to put your hat on, because one of the things that we do in our autism program is we spend the first 2 weeks on you and your mental health. And the best way to understand your child is understanding yourself first, and how you perceive things. So your perceptions are triggering your emotions and your behaviors too. So if you kind of take the hat of your child off and put the hat of yourself on for a minute, and think about how you're perceiving things. Now, everybody has their own belief systems, their unique belief systems that are often created around 0 to 7, like the foundations of how you perceive life. Primarily, that's coming from your parents and other family members. And then you've got environment, media, culture, religion. All your experiences are all influencing how you think and how you feel about life and about your self-worth. And you have reference points of what helps you to pursue pleasure and avoid pain. So you can have a picture from your belief systems of how life is supposed to be, a right life that you're supposed to be living in order for you to have a good life, in order for you to be worthy and good enough. And so we can create all of these perceptions of ourselves that we feel we have to be experiencing in order to get life right, in order to feel good enough and feel worthy and feel like our life is on the right track, so that we can experience pleasure and avoid pain. And the brain is geared to do that from a survival response. So we want to have pleasure, we want to feel good, we want to feel safe, and we want to avoid pain and things that are unsafe. So based on our perceptions, we will feel certain ways towards life. So we can have these pictures, I call them pictures or ideas, belief systems, that I need to be a certain identity, I need to be the smart one, I need to have life go to plan, I need to get approval, I need to do certain things in order to feel good. So from the perspective of your child, it could be that they create kind of identity profiles for themselves, that they might be the smart one, they need to get approval themselves, there's certain ways they've got to fit in order to feel good enough, that they need to, from a survival point of view, they need to avoid sensory stimulus or seek sensory stimulus. Certain routines might be something that they feel they need to have in order to feel safe or to feel, that things are predictable. They may have had previous experiences, or you may have had previous experiences, and you're trying to get things to go right. So it's looking at, how am I perceiving life in order to pursue that pleasure and avoid pain? And what tends to happen is, because we have these ideas of this right life, so if we focus on yourself for a moment, sometimes we have these ideas of, how family life was meant to look, or how your life was meant to unfold, or the type of parent that you're supposed to be, and you're trying to get things right. And the first thing that happens, we call it, when we're feeling stressed, is we call them our stressful thinking lenses. So there's 4 lenses that are always prominent whenever we're feeling stress. And the first one is this tendency to measure things as right versus wrong. So because of the pictures that I have in my mind, I think that there's a right path that my life is supposed to be on, and I'm noticing that I'm on a wrong path, that things aren't going to plan. I start judging, the difference between right versus wrong. And when that right versus wrong lens kicks in, we then start to go, well, where's my evidence that life's going wrong? Because I'm missing out on things. I'm missing out on approval. I'm missing out on time for myself. I'm missing out on time for my kids. I'm missing out on certain experiences I was supposed to have on this right path. And that's making me feel bad. It's making me, feel unsafe. And then the reasoning part of the brain kicks in and says, well, why am I on this wrong path? Why am I missing out? Because I believe that I or someone else should have behaved differently. So we get into this kind of should have, could have lens that says that's kind of like a bit of blame, whether you might be blaming yourself or blaming other people and saying that I should have behaved differently. I should know how to look after my child. I should know how to prevent a meltdown. Why didn't I know? Why am I not doing things well enough? Or it could be my child should know better. My child should be at an age where they're able to understand what I'm saying, and they should be able to, do the right thing and listen to me and follow all the rules and do all the things that I've taught them how to do. I shouldn't have to repeat myself over and over again. So we can get caught up in this conversation that just kind of adds to the missing out lens and adds to the wrong path and, confirms that I'm on this wrong path and moving further away from the right path. And then those three lenses all spiral down into the core belief that underlies it all the stress really is because the brain is always saying, what does this mean? What does this mean about me? So it then starts to make this value judgment on me and my life. And it starts to go, because life's gone wrong and I'm missing out and I or someone else is to blame, that they should have acted differently. I then think that must mean that me or my life is worth less. And because of that feeling that comes with feeling bad, feeling worth less, feeling not good enough, feeling bad about yourself, that's where that behavior then kicks in. So this is where we go, perception then triggers emotions and triggers our behaviors. So if we're wanting to change either our behaviors or our child's behaviors, we need to look at the perceptions that are triggering those behaviors in the first place. And this is why we focus on you and your mental health for the first 2 weeks, to really get that understanding of what we call the narratives or the stories that we tell ourselves that are triggering our own emotions that could be stopping us from being able to support our child the way that we want to be supporting our child. And sometimes even our own behaviors that we go, oh, why do I do that? Well, we really want to understand the thinking that's caused your emotions and your behaviors, just like we want to do that with your child as well. What must you be thinking to be feeling the way that you are, to be behaving the way that you are? And then when you are understanding the world of you, we jump out of the world of you and we jump into the world of your child and go, what must they be thinking to be feeling the way that they are, to be behaving the way they are, and to try to find that narrative that may be in conflict with reality, or that narrative that may need tweaking or changing on how you or your child are perceiving your life. So that's the first thing, is looking at the perception side of things. The second thing with anxiety is that it's always future focused. So we take the reference points from our past and we use that to anticipate what's going to happen in the future. So if we jump into the world of your child for a minute, well, let's use an example that maybe we had a past experience, maybe your child had a past experience with friends that was quite painful or quite uncomfortable or sad for them. Maybe they experienced, my friends don't like me, or I was upset about something to do with my friends. Because of that event, anything that seems like it's going to look like that same past experience can anticipate, we can use that perception to anticipate what's going to happen in the future. And we think that it's happened like that last time, so it's going to happen again. So we're going to try and do things behaviorally in order to avoid experiencing that same thing again. So it's not always accurate information that they're using in order to predict what's going to happen next. So it's kind of like what we call a this equals that concept. So the brain is trained for survival. So its detection system is looking for evidence of whether this that I'm experiencing with the five senses equals that something that I've experienced in my past that may have been dangerous or distressing. So anyone, like yourself or your children, can develop a heightened sensitivity to anything that seems even remotely close to that past experience, and then respond as if there was an actual threat happening right now in this moment. Often this doesn't equal that, but the brain doesn't know that in that moment. So sometimes your children need help to orient to the present moment and look for evidence of safety, because their past reference points are making them look for evidence of things being unsafe or things being scary or things potentially going wrong. But we need to help them to look for how things could potentially go right, or help them to be in that present moment, looking at the reality of what's actually happening. Cool. Just so you know as well, we have Laura and Christy that are online as well, that are kind of looking through your chats. Because there's so many of you in tonight, I don't actually get to look at these chats. I can't even tell which one's like the newest ones or the oldest ones. And I sort of look down periodically to make sure there isn't any text from Christy to say you guys can't hear me or something's dropped out. But it looks like everything's doing well. So occasionally I'll glance over to your chats, but I don't actually get to see them. But Christy and Laura, if there's any kind of questions that you have in terms of the webinar or anything kind of logistical, they're there to support you as well. Sorry, I should have mentioned that earlier. My jet lag brain had forgotten. The third aspect of anxiety is that it's going to be about control and prevent. So the brain gets into this, I must control things to go right and prevent anything from going wrong. That's the perception of life and the feeling that comes from that. Because remember, the thoughts trigger the emotions, and emotions are just sensations in the body that we recognize as emotions. We feel out of control, unable to relax, panicky, fearful, irritable, angry, irrational. And so sometimes the behaviors that come from that can be proactive. I'm deliberately trying to control and prevent. Sometimes they are reactive, being that the body and the nervous system is in survival mode and it's doing what it needs to do in order to, feel safe, come back to that, equilibrium. We have to kind of recognize that either way, whether it's proactive or reactive behavior, it's helping you to understand your child, what they might be perceiving. It will make sense to your child while they're behaving that way, even though it might be immoral, even though they know it might be wrong in terms of our morals, in terms of our rules, in terms of our social etiquette that you've probably worked so hard in order to get them to learn. Yet they're doing deliberately, going the opposite direction, or which is the case in a meltdown, is that it's a reactive response. It's not deliberate. It's coming from a survival. Either way, we need to understand what must they have been thinking? How are they perceiving things? How are they understanding things in order to trigger that response and the emotional response and the behavioral response in the first place? Because they're just trying to control things to go back to something that feels right, something that feels safe. So we need to look at what those perceptions are. So when we're experiencing, obviously, those five senses, if the brain is evaluating that there is a threat to survival, then that's going to trigger that feeling of fear and terror, and it's going to trigger those behaviors to go into fight or flight or run, hide, freeze, any of those kind of survival responses. So it's important to kind of understand what's going on for your child so that you can kind of help them to regulate their nervous system. And these are all the things that we kind of help you to understand and go through within our program. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what the external event is. If the mind is perceiving the event as a threat, the physiological reaction is going to be the same. The body cannot differentiate between something that's real or something that's imagined. So to the child, it feels like, especially if they don't understand emotions and they don't understand, and a lot of young children don't, even teenage children, they don't often understand how the mind works, how this mind-body connection works. So even if they're, it doesn't make sense to you that, or they're doing what you might call overreacting, if they're perceiving it as a threat, it doesn't matter whether you think it's irrelevant or not, or you think it's trivial or not. Their physiological response is the same, because their response is seeing it as a threat. And they can be recalling memories and experiencing it in the present moment as if it was real, as if they're being chased by a lion, because that's how the body responds when they're in that survival mode. It's having the same physiological responses as it would be as if it's being chased by if they're being chased by a lion. So the other thing that we need to add into this, particularly for autistic children, is that trauma can very much be playing a part in triggering that anxiety response, even when there doesn't seem to be a threat. So we need to kind of touch on how trauma actually influences how we think, feel, and behave. Now, what is trauma? The simplest way of defining trauma, which comes from Dr. Daniel Siegel, clinical professor in psychiatry, is an experience we have that overwhelms our capacity to cope. So it's any experience that we have that overwhelms any capacity that we have to cope. If you don't have the resources, the ability, the reference points to be able to cope, you're going to start to feel overwhelmed by that experience, and that is what can trigger trauma. So when people often think of trauma, they often just think of like car accidents or abuse or war or, those kind of big, what they call big T traumas. But trauma can depend on the person and their ability, so the resources that they have to handle it. So if they feel like they can't handle it and they don't know when it's going to stop and they don't know how they're going to get out of that situation, that's trauma. That can be traumatic for a child. So that can be if your child is going to school every day and they're not able to cope with all the different challenges and the things that are being thrown at them, and it overwhelms their capacity to cope, that can be traumatic. And so if they keep going back into those same environments or keep having those same experiences, that's going to trigger anxiety, because anxiety is going to go, okay, anything that's even close to this equals that. Anything that's close to that is going to be something that I have to control and something that I have to manage. So anxiety can become a very heightened thing that happens when we've repetitively experienced something traumatic. So other forms in trauma, so we talked about school. It can also come from sensory overwhelm. It can come from repetitive difficulty in understanding or trying to be understood when communicating with others, bullying and teasing, medical procedures, discrimination, so how a child or person is treated because of their diagnosis or other personal characteristics, marginalization, so being denied access to education, opportunities, or participation in activities, repetitive messaging around deficits and not feeling adequate, social confusion or rejection. So if you think about what life might be like for your child, repetitive day-to-day experiences of some of these or many of these can actually train that nervous system into a constant state of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn responses. So we have to be really mindful that, life for an autistic child can be quite heightened because of all the different things that are going on for them. So this is why we put so much emphasis on really understanding your child, understanding how autism presents, understanding the experience that they're having in order to be triggering their emotions and their behaviors, so that we can really kind of work with what do we need to do to help them on either a perception level or help them on a practical level, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So if you say, how did this young person get so anxious about everyday life? Why have they developed such a need to control? We can look at that process of event, 5 senses, evaluation, process, emotions, and behaviors, and we can go, well, look at their past reference points. It can be things like not understanding quick enough, being confused, conflicting information, experiencing impatient people. The consequences of getting something wrong may be triggering them to try to get it right all the time, so they don't experience those same consequences of getting it wrong. Trying to do something well for the second time and failing and feeling like a failure. Overwhelmed by tasks, how the tasks are being presented, trying to process the tasks, trying to understand the tasks, and then understand them and turn them into action, doing something with those tasks, can be very overwhelming due to executive functioning challenges. Also, body functions not necessarily being reliable or unpredictable for some children. New situations that were scary or unknown, no resources to deal with it. Not knowing how to do something, not knowing the answer to something, wanting to please people or fit in, getting in trouble, really wanting something to go well and it didn't, and conflict between expectations and preferences. So you add up all of those things and it makes sense that a child is going to feel anxious about life and about certain things in life or certain events in life because of those past reference points that have stacked up over time. So again, looking at getting an understanding of why that anxiety makes sense to your child is the key part of helping your child. Understand first, and then we can work out what specific things that we need to do in order to help your child and support your child to feel more safer, and not feel in that anxiety state as much. Because I'm probably going to repeat myself here. I tend to do this, that I say something ahead of time and then I get to the next slide and I've just said what the next slide says. But why do I need to know all of this about anxiety? Firstly, to identify the real cause of the behaviour. Secondly, to identify what must that person be thinking or feeling to be behaving this way. To identify the reference points that they may be using to predict the future that they're anxious about, and kind of working out whether their perceptions are accurate or not, and helping them to understand whether their perceptions are accurate or not. To ascertain what the child is actually trying to control and prevent, what is the what's the payoff, what's the benefit of their behavior, what are they trying to pursue, or what are they trying to avoid by controlling and preventing, and to ultimately establish the problem, the goal, and what that gap is that we need to fill. Now, we like to use this picture because the solution depends on actually identifying the actual problem. This is why we put so much focus on what must my child be thinking to be feeling this way and to be behaving this way, because we want to be applying the correct solution. So if you look at this photo, we can see that although the sun's hot, the child's standing in front of a fire going, "Mum, I'm hot." And she thinks, okay, well, it's a hot day, so here, let me protect you with my umbrella. But that's not going to stop him from being hot because he's standing in front of a fire, right? So that is an example of why we need to get to the root of the actual problem so that we can apply the correct solution. And one of the one example of this is, a parent said to me that a child had gotten into trouble for pushing somebody in the playground, and they gave him kind of a timeout, and they gave him a social story about keeping his hands to himself and, basically playground etiquette stuff, which is fine, if the child's issue was not knowing that there's social etiquette and not knowing to keep their hands to themselves. So I kind of encouraged the mum to do a little bit more digging as to what actually happened. And as she got a little bit more information over the coming days, it turned out that the child had actually been overwhelmed in the playground and had seen another child push another child and then get sent to kind of a timeout area for some quiet time where they got to read books and kind of be separated from the group. And because the child was feeling so overwhelmed, they thought that if they pushed a child as well, and the mum was confused because he not only pushed him, but he made sure that he really got into that sandpit. So he did it a couple of times to make sure he did a good enough job. And then he got sent to that area that he wanted to get sent into. So the social story really needed to be about, now that we understand that, how he can ask for help if he feels overwhelmed, how he can ask to be removed from the playground and go into an area that helps him to regulate his emotions, because the social story about social etiquette was not helpful in that situation. So it's a perfect example of why we need to really hone in on what that actual problem is before we start setting goals and before we start trying to implement solutions as to how to help that person. So if we look at school avoidance as another thing in terms of anxiety, and we do a specific school avoidance webinar, and we also have a whole week dedicated to school avoidance in our program. But just as a kind of snapshot of that, we need to isolate the different areas of school to understand what's actually triggering. Because some parents are like, how do we stop school avoidance? Well, first we need to understand what the problem is, but we can't just say understand the problem in terms of school, because there's different aspects of school that could be either stacking up, or it could be one major area that we need to focus on, or several areas that we need to focus on. So we've got social, environmental, emotional, academic, physical, trauma. So social, how are we experiencing social interactions, and is that triggering anxiety? Is it environmental, as in like where I'm sitting in the classroom, I can't hear the teacher, how the information is being delivered to me? Is it academic, that the work's too hard, it's too easy? Is it emotional, that there's stuff going on for me in terms of my perception of myself and how I'm perceiving my self-worth or perceiving situations? Is it trauma that we're dealing with? Is it physical sensations? I'm too hot, I'm too cold, my uniform is scratching me, it's really distracting me, and the sounds are really loud. Like, so there can be many different things. And even if, like, say for example, we've got social, academic and physical that's playing out there, that's triggering the school avoidance, because remember, it's about control and prevent. I'm trying to avoid going to school because of the anxiety that I feel. And it might take some time to work on the social aspect of things. But if you also understand as a separate category of school avoidance that the environmental and the physical side of things, or the academic and the physical side of things, are a challenge, and we put things in place to help make that easier, then it can make the social element easier to deal with, even though it's still challenging, because the other areas have been worked on. So we can't just see it as a collective. We have to look at different aspects of the schooling life to see what is triggering my child. What are they thinking about each one of these areas? How are they perceiving it? How are they experiencing it? And what can I do to help them on a mindset level, or in terms of applying practical strategies? We also have masking that can occur in autism. So autistic masking involves the conscious or subconscious effort to camouflage one's neurodivergence traits in order to appear more neurotypical and conform to social expectations. So there becomes a certain point where a child will recognize that some of their innate traits are different to neurotypical children, and they may have even experienced some consequences of that in terms of like bullying or teasing, or even just not recognizing that maybe they're not doing things the same way as another child, or a lot of their peers are, and that can help them, that can influence them to feel certain ways about themselves and feel like the ways that they do things need to be masked in order to be liked, in order to fit in order to conform, or in order to avoid the negative consequences that they've experienced in the past by being themselves. So we have to be really mindful of when a child is trying to mask who they really are. And what that can look like is it can be mimicking, so mimicking facial expressions, modifying tone of voice, scripted, so memorizing conversations or phrases and applying them, but not necessarily applying them in context, or in the kind of the right ways, or you can tell that it's not really authentic to how they would normally be. They could be suppressing their stimming behaviours. They may be really trying to maintain eye contact when really that's not comfortable for them or natural for them. They could be conforming to social norms, so they have to wear the same clothes or a certain external appearance so that they look the same. Masking sensory sensitivities, so they could be very heightened to sounds or feelings or smells, but they're trying to mask that, and that takes an enormous amount of energy to mask, by the way, to actually be trying to curb a natural part of yourself day in, day out, so people don't see the real you, because you think that some negative consequence is going to happen, either to your self-worth or actually in a experiential sense. hiding special interests, social mirroring. So continual masking can not only be exhausting, but it can actually cause fatigue. It can actually cause burnout. So constant masking requires a lot of mental and emotional energy that can lead to exhaustion. It can lead to isolation. Masking can lead to social disconnection or a fear of genuine relationships. So we all know when we have a genuine relationship with someone, we're free to be ourselves. We're free to be authentic. We know that we're able to have authentic, real conversations and be ourselves, and we're still going to be liked. But if we have a fear of that, we can go, okay, people are too scary. I'm going to isolate from myself, even though I still want that connection, because we innately as human beings want that sense of connection, sometimes in different ways, but we still want that sense of connection. They can have identity struggles, so it creates this divide between the true self and that presented persona. So we don't really know who I am, and we don't feel safe to be who I am, even if I did know who I was. Mental health impact leads stress, links to higher anxiety and depression. Delayed diagnosis is one of the other consequences. So this can often happen, particularly in girls, that it can actually hinder an accurate diagnosis, which actually prevents or delays the support that they're needing. So if you're a professional on this webinar, if you're hearing a parent say, this is what I'm experiencing at home, and you're sitting there going, well, I don't see any of that, it's highly likely that the child is masking for the benefit of you or the group. And we need to kind of understand, what does masking look like and why are they masking in the first place? How can we create a safer environment so they can be authentically themselves? It can create relationship challenges, so stops, again, that genuine connection and understanding with other people, and self-esteem erosion. It fosters feelings of inadequacy and triggers anxiety. So we really have to bring into the conversation getting to know that child really well to understand what masking looks like for them. Oh, I thought I had another slide involved in that. Yeah. So at the end of the day, it's looking at why do they need to mask? How can we make that environment a safer environment or a different environment, a neuroaffirming environment, create a culture within the group that we can be ourselves, and understanding not just autism, but understanding diversity, different preferences, making that okay to be different, to have different likes, different preferences, different ways of thinking, different strengths, different weaknesses, and really bringing that into your family culture, or if you're a teacher or educator, your school culture or your professional culture, so that people feel like they don't need to mask in order to fit in and to feel good and to feel good enough, and to be able to create an environment where we can express when we're feeling challenged by something, so that we have this kind of solution-focused environment where we can go, okay, cool, we're experiencing this. What can we do about it? How can we help you? How can we help you feel safe to be yourself and to enjoy life, basically? So when we're talking about the solutions to anxiety, we're kind of talking about two aspects. We're talking about the mind and body, and then we're talking about the practical aspects. So the first element is looking at alleviating anxiety at a mindset level. We're identifying the inaccurate perceptions. We're reframing and teaching a new way of thinking and feeling about situations. It's that positive messaging around neurodiversity, so that we're really implanting worthiness and self-acceptance, that we can be different neurologically, we can be different just generally in our personalities, because we're giving those positive messages about neurodiversity, about individuality, about uniqueness. We're using neuroaffirming language in our culture, in our family culture, in our work culture, our professional culture. We're talking about differences, not deficits. We're prioritizing strengths and interests. We're creating an inclusive and accommodating environment that allows the child to express their individuality and reduce masking. We're teaching a growth mindset. We're talking about how mistakes are normal. Mistakes are opportunities to learn, that things not going to plan is normal sometimes, and it provides us opportunities to learn and grow and redirect. We want to show them evidence of this from their life, from other people's lives, so it normalizes that we have highs and lows in life. We have times when life doesn't go to plan, life does go to plan, where we're good at something, we're not good at something, we're working on something, we're progressing towards something, that we have strengths in things, we're hopeless at other things. Like, that's normal. We're all like that. So we're really wanting to essentially, in the mindset, in the perception, we want the child to find evidence of their safety. And this is an absolute number one priority when it comes to mindset, when it also comes to the practical side of things as well. We want to be training the nervous systems, because obviously how we perceive things is triggering how we respond to things emotionally. So we want to bring in co-regulation. So you're regulating your own nervous system so that you can be a model for calmness, and you can model what regulation looks like. And when the child is in a dysregulated state, you're in a regulated state, so that you're able to, help co-regulate and move your child into that more regulated state themselves from your own place of regulation. I get that that's not always easy, and that's why we work on you and your mindset and things like that as well, so that we're helping you to be able to be in that regulated state more often. We know that, nobody's perfect and we all get dysregulated at times. It's not about being perfect. It's about reducing that kind of refractory period between your thoughts and emotions, and recognizing how long do you sit in that emotion before you can move into a regulated state yourself. So it's not about perfection. It's about awareness and adjustment. So looking at how to co-regulate, looking at creating environments that have reference points of safety, so the child not only feels safe in the present environment, but can draw upon those past reference points in order to predict that a situation is about to be safe. So that's really important. Helping the child to be aware of their nervous system. What does regulated even feel like? Some children don't even know what a regulated state feels like, what calm even feels like. So we have to sometimes deliberately help the child to recognize what that feels like. Teaching emotional regulation tools, quiet activities that help the child to know what calm feels like, providing the child with mental breaks is going to be really helpful, training that nervous system. Now, the practical strategies, on the other hand, is things that we can actually do to create an environment where this child actually feels safe. Does their home, school, or therapeutic environment align with the child's needs for safety? Not what you think they need to be safe. Do we actually know what the child needs to be safe, and are we creating that in their environment? How do we help the child to prepare for things, to plan for things, to predict what's going to happen? Because with anxiety being about control and prevent, information can be really helpful to help the child, whether you do that, present that in visual context, to help know what's next, to let them know ahead of time what they can expect and how things are going to be experienced, so they don't create stories in their own mind of those those narratives I was saying before, based on old reference points. If you give them certain information, sometimes that can really mitigate going into an anxiety response. How can I resource this child? By developing new skills and strategies. So if we understand the problem, then sometimes we recognize that it's not a mindset problem. It's literally a skills development solution that we can be providing. What can I do to prevent situations that trigger this child? So we can look back at past anxiety or past behaviours and learn from it and go, what might they have been thinking or feeling in that situation, and what can we do to prevent that situation next time? Sometimes redirection or distraction can work in that moment without being dismissive. So we have to be really mindful that you're not dismissing what they're feeling. But sometimes if you're recognizing that the anxiety is starting to amp up, you may be able to get to it before it actually turns into a full anxiety attack, or, an anxiety, they get too escalated. You may be able to use redirection or distraction to orient them to that present moment, so they're not drawing upon those reference points to predict that future. Do I need to lower or change my expectations? Sometimes we have too higher expectations of a child that they don't have the resources to cope with. And so we have to be very, very mindful of our own narratives about what our expectations are, because it may not be accurate expectations relevant to this particular child, of where they're at in their brain development and just where they're at in that moment. because in that moment, they're just doing their best. And sometimes they can't do things that they were doing great yesterday, because there can be so many anomalies that can interfere with being able to focus on what they're needing to do. So we kind of got to add some compassion in there and kind of go, how do I lower those expectations sometimes, or change my expectations? And I get that sometimes there can be a fine line between, helping your child to kind of be pushed a little bit to be able to cope with certain situations, and just saying, you know what, today is not the day, and lowering those expectations. So it's about really attuning to the child in that present moment and looking at what's happening for them, and whether they have the resources in that moment, and just in terms of knowledge base, to be able to be pushed to handle that situation a little bit more. We have to take a real gradient approach. And these are the things that we do teach: meltdown, shutdowns, like aggressive behaviours, like those sorts of things, but also as well helping your child to, learn how to just go a little bit beyond where they're capable of, with support from you, to be able to progressively move them into being able to cope with situations better and better and better. So we really kind of break it down so that we're just taking that little bit next step. So we help you to do all of this in our 9-week program. Can we make changes to or manage the environment to accommodate this child? So looking at what sort of things that we can do in the environment, and how we approach things. So do we need to add more visuals? Do we need to rearrange the room? Do we need to change how loud things are? Do we need to change the way that we communicate? Make things clearer. Don't use metaphors or things that the language that the child doesn't understand. Talk slower, talk faster, use examples that the child relates to. So use knowledge they already have when you're trying to link it to something that they don't know. Things like that. There are lots of things that we can do to support the child and change the environment that helps to accommodate where they're at, and that, while we're trying to provide that gentle exposure to just outside those capabilities and push them to that kind of next level. So they are learning those skills. They are still progressing, but we can't be adding these expectations and forcing them to be at a place that they're just not at. We've got to see where they're at and see what that next step is. So everybody has a window of tolerance where they're able to cope within that window of tolerance, and then we can be pushed outside of that, where we go into hypervigilance or hypovigilance, where we go into fight or flight, or we can go into shutdown. So we have to know where that window of tolerance is, and we've got that. We're trying to get that gentle exposure to a little bit beyond, outside of that window, with the resources. So you have to resource the child for that next step, is what I was talking about before. So these are the practical strategies that we can apply to help your child to feel safer in their environment, to feel like they can, feel a little bit more in control. They can predict what's happening next. They can, and they then eventually be able to handle things when they can't predict what's going to happen, because we're not always going to be able to do that. But while they're learning to do that, we need to try and create this kind of safe container, because if they're in that survival mode, the learning part of the brain actually shuts down, that they can't actually think straight when they're in that fight or flight mode or that shutdown mode, because the thinking brain literally goes offline. So sometimes we have to accommodate the child so that they're in a safe enough container to be able to be in that window of tolerance where learning can take place, where we can then resource them to be able to handle situations that are a little bit more challenging. So yes, you can be like, oh, well, the real world doesn't involve accommodating the child's every whim and every need. And I agree with that. But you're not going to teach your child how to handle those life challenges, those realities of life, if they already feel unsafe. We have to create a safe container first by accommodating them, and then gently exposing them to just outside that window of tolerance. So we're just about to move into our final part of the webinar, which is talking about PDA, pathological demand avoidance, which is an extreme kind of element of anxiety that can present. But just wanted to stop here and just kind of go, if you are resonating with this information, I'm going to pop something up now, just that you can go to our website and have a look at that autism program that I was talking about before, reminding you that we work on your mental health first. We understand what autism is and how that presents in your child, what neurodiversity means, what being neurodiverse affirming means. We talk about anxiety, PDA, meltdown, shutdown, school can't, school avoidance, whichever one you call it, aggressive behaviours. We look at sibling rivalry, family dynamics, including marital conflict and time management and all of those sorts of things. It can be funded through your child's NDIS plan. Both parents can enrol under the one fee. You get ongoing live group Q&A sessions with myself, lifetime access to all of our course material, and obviously, and we also have counselling support, like email counselling support as well. You get that all for life. So if this information is resonating with you and you're kind of going, how do I get to the nitty gritty of applying all of this? How do I understand, how do I expand on what you've been learning in this webinar? Take a look at that, see if it's for you, and reach out to us if you have any questions. I'll keep that up as we keep going through, but just thought we'd put it up now just so that you can jump on there if you need to or if you want to. So let's jump into PDA, pathological demand avoidance. Some of you have heard about it. Thankfully, it's starting to become more talked about in the community. It's not a diagnosis, so you can't actually get a diagnosis of PDA, but it's a profile of PDA. It can also be called extreme demand avoidance, or a more neurodiverse affirming way of looking at it is pervasive drive for autonomy. So a need for that autonomy. It's an extension of extreme anxiety in autism. So PDA individuals, they share autistic characteristics, but in addition has key features of PDA profile, which are things like resisting and avoiding like ordinary demands of life, like putting shoes on, brushing teeth, getting in the car, even things that they're wanting to do, like go to the movies, like avoiding ordinary demands of life, using social strategies as part of that avoidance, looking like they're really socially able or socially like social butterflies, but this may actually mask underlying differences or difficulties in social interactions and communication. So you might find that those social interactions might be, a lot, they do it a lot, but it lacks some depth, lacks kind of understanding. They can experience intense emotions and mood swings, appearing comfortable in role play, pretense or fantasy, can have an intense focus, often on other people, whether it's real or fictional. Keeping in mind that if your child is PDA, that they don't necessarily have all of these. It's just like autism, it's a spectrum. But these are some of the additional characteristics that come with PDA. A need for control, so often driven by anxiety or an automatic threat response. And you find that conventional approaches in support, parenting or teaching are ineffective. You find that it goes the other way. PDA can be really confusing as well, because it can be like 1 minute your child can put their shoes on, they've been doing it all week, and then the next day it's like it just caused a massive meltdown. You're like, I just don't get it. I know you can do it and you've done it a million times, but all of a sudden today we can't do it. And I don't understand why that's such an issue for you. So little things like that can be very confusing for parents. But what we need to recognize is that it's not a deliberate choice. This is a survival strategy. So meltdowns in PDA are best understood as being like panic attacks. So when we look at it's like a hierarchy of strategies that we try to use to avoid the demand. I'm going to talk about what a demand is in the moment. But we start off being calm. Somebody issues a demand, like put your shoes on, for example. They might use things like distraction, excuses, procrastination to try and get out of that demand. They may use things like physical incapacitation, or I can't do it because my leg's broken, or I can't do it because my mind's shut off, like my mind's gone for a walk or something like that. Withdrawal into fantasy so that we don't have to deal with that. Reducing meaningful conversation, so could pretend that I'm not listening to you, or just like blah, 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 going to blah, blah, so that we don't have to engage with you and what you're demanding of me. And then we move into kind of trying to take control. So that they might go into complete compliance, but then later break down or do certain things in order to control. So you can see that they're upping the ante on the strategies they use to avoid the demand. And then, of course, it can land up in fight, flight, or shut down. So we get upset, we get agitated, we can self-harm, we can shut down, we can move into aggression, we can run away, any of those things in order to avoid and stop the demand that's being given to us because of the threat that it presents to that demand, to providing that demand. So there's a difference between autism demand avoidance and PDA. So in PDA, so in autism, we can have, I think we do it in the next slide. So let's just stick with this slide because I know that the next one's going to actually explain the difference properly. But in PDA, it's actually the demand itself that creates the anxiety. So it's not the circumstances, not the environment, it's the actual demand. It's the pressure of what you've asked them to do or what they've considered to be a demand that actually triggers this kind of shutdown response. It's not a question of it's a question of can't do it. It's not about won't do it. It's not, when we hear demand avoidance, it sounds very much like there's a demand and I'm not doing it. And it sounds like it's full of attitude. It's not like that. It's actually a can't do it because the body actually sees it as such a threat that it actually shuts down. So sometimes PDA is often described as this neurological tug of war between the brain, heart, and body. And it doesn't just happen on things that they don't want to do. That you may see them as, I don't want to put my shoes on, so there I'm going to go into demand avoidance. It's not like that. It's like I can't put my shoes on, even though I know that I need to and I want to, my body won't do it. Or I want to go to the movies and I've been looking forward to seeing a movie, but all of a sudden the anxiety has triggered, I can't go to the movies. I just can't move to do what I'm supposed to do, which would be incredibly frustrating for a PDA. There's an upside to PDA: loyal, funny, tenacious, empathetic, and very empathic, very justice oriented. So, that's where that loyalty comes in. Very honest, imaginative, can be quite stubborn and independent at the same time. So there's some really great, they can be very charismatic and so there's some really great characteristics that come with PDA as well. So I don't want you to think that it's all challenges. There can be some really good aspects to PDA as well. But the difference between autism and PDA is that autism can have avoidance of tasks because of sensory difficulties, that, there's sensory overload and the sensory seeking, so I'm going to try and avoid that task. Difficulties in transitioning from one activity to another, difficulty processing information, confusion, I don't understand what's going on and it's too hard, so I just can't, I don't have the resources to deal with it, so I'm just going to try and avoid it or check out. Doesn't see any point in what they're doing, has no interest in it, so just goes, why would I do that? I don't want to do that. There's no point to it, so we'll avoid it. So little things like that kind of makes sense from an autistic perspective, that they may have those avoidance strategies. But in PDA, it's the demand itself. It elicits the pressure of expectation, getting it right, doing it right, performing correctly the first time, or if I got it right once, having to get it right again, trying to avoid getting it wrong. What will they expect of me, and will I meet their expectations? You can hear that control and prevent. You can hear that anxiety in that pressure of expectation. That's what it is when you ask something of them, even if you aren't asking, even things like, how was your day? It's the demand of, what do I say? What does she want me to say? Does she really want me to tell her what my day was like? Or does she want another version of it? How's she going to feel about that? It could be this whole narrative that goes on, either consciously or unconsciously, that triggers this sense of pressure or worry about what's going to happen next, or fearful of a situation, or people that feel unsafe, that triggers this sense of anxiety, that triggers a shutdown and triggers trying to avoid the situation in however we can. So what is a demand? Any request or expectation that requires a specific outcome or result that must be achieved, an expected action they must take, or leads to an outcome they could get wrong, or any kind of pressure to get something right. So basically, it's any command that promotes loss of autonomy or control. So direct demands are requests or questions made by other people, like put your shoes on, sit here and wait, pay this bill, would you like a drink? So when you start to think about the things that you ask of your child or things that you say to your child, you can start to see how many things can actually feel like a demand to them. So what does it feel like to a PDA person? Well, this is from the PDA Society UK website. So Isaac says, I feel most anxious when I'm pressed to do something I feel I can't do, and people around me don't understand what I mean when I say I can't do that. I know how to do things, and I can do them sometimes, but most of the time I just can't. It starts with avoidance, but if someone's insisting, I'm going to go straight into panic. I go from being sort of okay to crashing down a hill. It's the most frustrating thing to have the functional capacity to understand what's happening, but the functional ability just isn't there. It's the worst form of self-sabotage. And Tally says, demand avoidance makes it sound like I'm avoiding things on purpose, but I literally have no choice in it whatsoever. So I prefer to call it demand anxiety. Now, there's many things that can help in PDA, and we have a whole week on PDA in our program and tips on how you can help a PDAer. But one of the major things that I wanted to leave you with is a change in language. So we often talk in imperative language, and we need to move into declarative language. So declarative language is where we speak a little bit more generally. So imperative language is often when we're very kind of like we're asking questions, and we're using that kind of demand language of put your shoes on and do this and do that and don't do this. And like we do a lot, give them a lot of, requests and demands in what we're saying. Even sometimes in PDA, offering praise can, even though it sounds like it's very encouraging and helpful, it can actually trigger a anxiety response because they feel like they may have to repeat that again. And that could be, really difficult for them to kind of feel that pressure. So instead of great job cleaning your room, it might be, this room looks clean. So you're making observations, you're making statements. Instead of put your shoes on, you say, I wonder where your shoes are. So it's using curiosity. And, I wonder what's next on our list to do. It might be providing help. It might be using visual prompts around the house or different routines or cues. So have a look at the difference between imperative and declarative language. If you're not wanting to do our program and your child's PDA, maybe have a look at some of the things that you can do to change your language from imperative language to declarative language. And of course, we expand on that a little bit further in our program. So if this feels like the kind of information and support that you feel will help your program, your family, we'd love to have you as part of our community. As I've talked about throughout the webinar, we do have a 9-week program. You get lifetime access to it and all of the support that we have. So we have in our program a framework that we use called SUPER, which helps you to kind of bring all this information together and create this kind of looking at it from different aspects, looking at it from your own self-awareness, looking at it from understanding your child, looking at how you can help your child to prepare and plan and predict, looking at emotional regulation and relationships, and looking at what's happening in the environment for your child, and looking at it from all of those different aspects. So you're supporting your child from from multiple aspects, and you're not just focusing on your child changing in order for the solution to be there to support your child. It's not just about the child, it's about so many other factors that we can do around your child to support your child, as well as helping them to progress developmentally. So we're looking at it from all of those different aspects, and we're putting that into the context of things like school avoidance, meltdowns, shutdowns, sibling rivalry, marital conflict, like all of those dynamics that we've been talking about today. So you've gotten kind of a snapshot, quick overview, a little bit, hopefully you've gotten some insights as well as some practical strategies that you can take home with you today, even if you don't do the program. But if you're wanting more information, we invite you to join in on our next round, which is coming up very soon. And just to reiterate, 98% of people use their child's NDIS plan. There is literally a parent carer training line item that you can use to join our program. If you are a professional, we actually have our sister company called Safe to Grow. We have an Inside Autism program for professionals. So in our follow-up emails after this, you'll get a link to that as well. So that brings us to the end of our content part of the webinar. We're going to answer some Q&A. I'm going to go into Q&A in a second. This Q&A will be in the recording as well, so you can listen to it there as well. So I'm going to jump into that now. Oh, I just had a question and it disappeared. How would you go about differentiating between stimming as a sign of anxiety needing support and typical stimming as a part of someone's autism and self-soothing regulation? Well, if there's self-soothing and regulation, if they're doing it for self-soothing regulation, that is kind of a little bit of an anxiety response. I think it's really just understanding when it happens and seeing if what the circumstances are around that. It's listening to your child, whether that's verbally or how their body is expressing things in the lead up to them then starting to stim. Stimming can sometimes just feel good. It's not even necessarily that we're regulating anxiety emotions. And I think maybe that's what you're asking me, is that when is it just this feels good and then I'm going to stim, or this is something I'm doing in order to bring myself down from feeling really anxious. And I think that's going to be expressed verbally or through the body in some way in the lead up to them stimming. So it's really kind of observing kind of patterns in their stimming behavior. When does it happen? What's their temperament like before the stimming? And even after the stimmings, to really kind of get a sense. And one of the things we do in the program is diarize behavior to try to look for patterns in why that behavior makes sense. So it's looking at how they're perceiving a situation. It might even be that after you were in a certain event where a stimming happens and you suspect that it might be anxiety related, that when they're outside of that event and they're in a regulated state, you might talk about how they feel about that situation or what was happening in that situation, or try to get some sense of how they were perceiving that situation to figure out whether they were feeling anxious about it, or whether you can make that situation feel more predictable, or, do certain things to help that situation feel safer. If you suspect that certain situations are triggering stimming for self-regulation, you may change the environment slightly and see if that influences whether they stim or not, to get a sense of whether that was anxiety related or not. So a few things that you can do there, but it's more about observation and really looking for those patterns in behavior. Do you have ideas about how to get schools on board with this? I have a child who is high masking and school won't put adjustments in place because he's so well behaved at school. So it is actually law under the Disability Act that they need to make reasonable adjustments to a classroom situation. It's about, like, you want to try. There is an organisation called Disability Law. They're based in New South Wales. They've got some great resources that could help you to work with the school, or at least know your rights in terms of disability law, and how you can actually communicate with your school and what you can do if that's kind of falling on deaf ears, because there is that disability law that they are required to make reasonable adjustments at many levels, whether that's like a whole school level or it's classroom level, whether it's a small groups where they kind of isolate into smaller groups to help support needs, or whether it's on one-on-one capacity. So there's kind of 3 tiers of support that they are obligated to provide all children, so that they get the same level of education as any other child. So that's part of what that disability law is. So having a look into that and how you can actually create those communication approaches, but also just kind of trying to give as much information as you can about what your child's needs are, and working with and saying, this is what I've noticed at home, what are you noticing at school, this is how I see my child mask, and helping them, give them information on what that masking is. Helping them to, like the Inside Autism program, it's just under 7 hours training. Maybe you could put them onto that. I don't know how open they would be if they're not wanting to put any adjustments in place. Trying to go above, like, who are you working with? Are you trying to talk to the teacher? Are you going above the teacher to work out, is there a special ed department? Is, how are they dealing with, extra needs kids in the school system? Because it might be that if they're not adequately supporting them, then you might have to go to the education department. This is where that disability law comes in. But it's really trying to communicate as much as you can, but not from a triggered point of view, like trying to use empathy. We kind of teach something called emotion coaching, where we help work with your child's emotions, but you could also use that on the teachers as well, and recognize that they are in a classroom full of a lot of kids with diverse needs, and that sometimes if we use compassion and we use empathy for them and go, look, I know things are really, you've got a lot on, and I know that sometimes it can be difficult to accommodate, so I'm not expecting you to just kind of drop everything, but how can we work together? Like, what information do you need so that, we're able to support him in the way that he's needing that support, because I'm seeing that, this is how he masks and this is what happens for him. I think the key thing here, if your child is masking, is we really need to try to get information from your child. Sorry, I'm saying him, but I don't know whether it's him or her, but trying to get information from your child as to what aspects, again, of the school that he's finding difficult in order to have to mask, so that we can find out where that need is to mask, and you're going to the teacher with accurate information about what triggers the masking in the first place, what it looks like, and what we could be doing in order to change the environment so that they're not actually needing to mask in the first place. The challenging thing is that if you're talking to a school environment that won't put adjustments in place, won't recognise autistic needs, then chances are they're also not providing the neuroaffirming culture that I was talking about before that allows for masking to discontinue, because they won't feel safe to be themselves. They won't feel like they're able to have authentic connections with people. So it is very much reliant on the school, and it may very well be the case of that school's just not right for your child, which can be difficult because sometimes it feels like it's the only option. But unfortunately, that is the reality of it, that your child won't stop masking unless it's safe to do so, which requires a neuroaffirming culture and an understanding of why they're masking in the first place, so that we can put things in place so that they don't have to do that anymore. My child is PDA. I've tried to reframe my questions to them, but feel like the barriers go up instantly. Do you have any other suggestions? Yeah, so just with like anxiety in general, like we need to understand, why are the barriers going up? Why are they seeing what you're asking them as a threat in the first place? If you can really understand what that is, what do they feel? What happens to them when you request things in a certain way? What do they think it means about them? Why is it difficult for them to do those things? Like, trying to get that information out of context. So don't try to have that conversation in the moment that you're asking them to do something, even if you reframe it. I think the difficult thing in your question is that I've got no other context to kind of work out where the communication lines can be dropped down. And this is one of the beauties of, when we work with clients on our program, that we have those live Q&A sessions, and we have the counselling emails that I can ask specific questions, and we can have this kind of back and forth conversation about what you've tried and what's worked and where you feel like that shutdown is, and looking for those patterns in their behavior that makes sense of why those barriers are going up instantly. Because sometimes it can be that there's a tone in your voice, there's a way that you say things, there's a sequence leading up to you even having that request, that they feel the pressure already rising before you've even reframed your question, so they can feel it coming, so that because of their past reference points. So it may even be that you're changing the whole structure of how you go through a certain routine, that you mix it up, or you work with the child, depending on how old they are, on what would make it easier for them to be able to go through that routine, because it might be that, you get into certain behaviors. Like, it can just be that you get up in the morning, you have a shower, you go and make your cup of coffee, and you start to get things ready, and it's at a certain time of the day that you'll then come up and go, I wonder what's next on your list, and you try to reframe it in a PDA way, but every single one of your behaviors leading up to you reframing it, whether it's a demand or not, has been part of the demand that they've become associated with, that your behaviors have become associated with. So it can be looking at all of that sort of thing as well, not just the actual way that you're presenting it. How am I presenting it in terms of my tone of voice? What is the routines that I go through, or that we go through, that surrounds that request or that demand that you're asking them to do? And also, what does it mean to them that's causing them to go into that anxiety, that's causing them to put that barrier up? And you may need to do that with different categories of when those barriers come up, and not look at it as a collective, but look at it individually and go, okay, well, morning routines are quite difficult. Barriers are constantly going up. What is it about that routine? Or it's about, doing homework. Well, let's look at that as an independent kind of category that we need to try to understand and work out where the sticking points are, and how we can rearrange things in terms of how you do things, how they do things, what makes it easier for them. It's really a trial and error process that involves understanding the patterns, understanding the problem, and then trying different solutions. And some things work and some things don't work. So hopefully there's something in that you can work with. You spoke about if the child's not comfortable with the environment, how do you manage this when you have a classroom of another 22 students? Yeah, it is difficult for teachers to be able to accommodate everyone, because I know you guys are in a room of, like I said, 22 students, and everybody has their own neurodiverse needs. It's getting to know that child, and getting to know all of your children really, and getting a sense of, are there certain, it's kind of categorizing it, I guess, into, what sort of things can you bring into the classroom that accommodates all children? So when we're looking at the way that you're teaching, can be that you're presenting information not just verbally, you're presenting information in terms of visuals, you're presenting information, like you're being flexible in terms of, how information is delivered. So it might be you have some flexibility on how they write a story. Like if you're just trying to concentrate on spelling, for example, and how to structure sentences, then there's flexibility on creating your own story from special interests. Is there flexibility in how you present things academically, in terms of how you test their academic ability. It can be flexibility in terms of writing. So the executive functioning can be challenging in terms of processing the information and then having to write what they're needing to write. So are there kind of classroom changes that you can make that can be flexible? So it's really understanding autism, understanding how autism can present. And this is where that Inside Autism program can be very specific to that, where you're really trying to work out what you can do at a classroom level for that is beneficial to all students, including your autistic children. How you can structure the environment so it's very predictable, that everybody knows what's next, everybody knows what's expected. The classroom's very organized so that there's different sections and there's routines that are accommodating every child. So there's lots of different things that you can do that can accommodate autistic children, but also accommodate every student. So these are those kind of context-wide, that's what they call context-wide supports, that is applicable to every child. And then we can have certain things that you may know of, certain children that need a little bit of extra support, that you can group them in certain activities that help them to get dedicated support, but you're doing it in groups rather than always having to apply one-on-one support. And then there will be some things that require one-on-one support, and it's getting to know the child and getting to know the needs of that child and where the difficulties lie for them, so you can put those things in place. But the whole essence of it is understanding where the problem points are in the first place, for you to then be able to put whether it's context-wide group support or individualized support in place for that child and other children as well. So hopefully you get something from that without understanding the context of the particular child or children you're talking about. That's probably the best kind of generalized answer that I can give you. Some of these questions are logistical ones that Christy and Laura can answer about the program. So I'm just kind of scrolling through for questions that I can help with. My son has muscle wasting disability, wheelchair bound, and aware of his physical limitations. He has developed a degree of anxiety with his peers. What do you recommend? So there's what I often talk about is things called in context and out of context. So when we're talking about in context, it can be that we're deliberately focusing on the anxiety that he's feeling about social interactions, and we're looking at what the problems are and what the solutions are and what we can do practically and, you know, in terms of his mindset to deal with the situation at hand, like the social situation at hand. When I talk about out of context in this, from this perspective, it's more things that are generalized, what we can do out of the moment to start working on how he feels about himself. So we want to be working out of context on his confidence, on accepting who he is as a person, his individuality, his strengths, what he brings to people, helping him to see his value in relationships and finding evidence of that. It's important, whether it's in school, out of school, that we're trying to get him involved with different types of peers. And it might even be that he's getting involved with, and this can even be family members, that he's got reference points of positive social interactions so that we can draw upon those to help him see his value and his worth and his contribution to other relationships. So he's bringing to the forefront evidence that he is good enough, he is valuable, he is whatever he is, funny, good at certain things, caring, like really trying to help him, not by telling him, showing him evidence of how he is valuable as a person. So it's not just like, but you're really caring. It can be like, remember when you were with your cousin and they hurt themselves and you were really caring. That's something that's part of who you are. You look at people and you show a lot of care towards people, and that's really important to people. Like when you care for someone and you genuinely see someone, they feel a sense of, oh, that's really nice, you know. So it's helping him to find evidence of his qualities that are unique to him, that go beyond a wheelchair and go beyond physical capabilities. And it's finding those peers that are also like that, that see beyond those physical limitations, and helping him to recognize that that's genuine friendship, and giving him some examples as well, that people who don't have physical limitations can still have difficulties with social interactions because they haven't yet found their people, and that some people can be quite superficial in terms of valuing, you know, capabilities and valuing certain ways of looking in order to prove their worth or feel worthy, but that in essence isn't what makes somebody worthy, and it's only a matter of time before they realize that. So it can be helping him to recognize that worth doesn't, and this is the outer context stuff, having these repetitive conversations, creating a culture within your family about that, where we talk about differences and diversity, and in general, not just in terms of neurodiversity but physical diversity. There's loads of value that everybody brings. Everybody's worthy because they exist, because they're here living their life and contributing value to other people just by being who they are. We all live, learn, grow, share and evolve because of everyone around them. So what we're wanting to do is help provide evidence of that in all contexts, not just in the context of social interactions. But from a practical point of view, socially, we're also wanting to try to create different situations where he can at least have one peer or positive interactions that helps him to feel that he is accepted, that he's liked, that he's lovable, that he's worthy, and that his genuine nature or his nature is wanted, needed, and loved and accepted by at least one other person independent of you, like cousins or family or whatever, so that you can keep saying, see, there is quality relationships. It's just that other people aren't necessarily able to see that. And just helping him to maybe be exposed to like-minded people, like in terms of his skill sets or his hobbies or things like that, that help him to connect with other like-minded people that feel the value of his knowledge or his information or just him being who he is, where they can look beyond his physicality. So I don't know whether that's possible to kind of expose him to even just, it's because it doesn't have to be all the time. It could just be little bits of his life where you can kind of go, this is great here, this is great here, this is great here, for him to be able to feel more accepting and have that reference point that I am accepted and I am loved and I am liked in these situations, which creates a buffer against the situations where he's not accepted. But this is where the foundation is what you're doing outside of that particular situation, the messaging that you're giving him, the evidence that you keep showing him of how great he is, that's going to build his confidence. That's also going to become that narrative, because we have this repetitive culture and dialogue going on externally about neurodiversity and diversity in general, and what promotes self-worth and why we're all valuable, so that he can keep looking for those reference points in his life as well. So there's those out of context stuff, and then those specific things that you can be doing. I've got time for one more question. How do you encourage a PDA person who's fixated on hating a person and help open their mind? I would probably try to really go there with, well, first of all, I would probably differentiate between what your version of hating people and their version of hating people is, just to see if they're the same. What we really ideally want to do is understand, one, what if I'm imagining that by you saying them hating a person, that's their language saying they're hating that person. But I have to explore the possibility that you may have used those words, hating a person. You may have a different reference point of what hating a person means versus what they do. But let's say they're saying, I really hate that person and I'm fixating on hating that person. We really want to understand why. Because if you think about why we hate a person, it's because of how we feel around that person or what we think they're doing to us. So we really want to get a sense of why it makes sense to your child that they feel like they feel that strongly towards that person. And we want to then try to again, it's that what I was just talking about before, about that in context, out of context, that yes, we want to be talking about hating and that specific person, but we also want to be talking in general about how, and when you're talking in general, that's really good in terms of PDA, because you're not putting the pressure on them to think a certain way. We're just talking generally. We're highlighting differences between people. We're highlighting that sometimes people act a certain way because of how they think. You know, when somebody's acting in a way that is inappropriate or nasty or mean, or it's usually because of what's going on for them. So we could be looking at a movie, for example, and seeing someone really angry and highlighting what they might be thinking in order to be behaving that way. You know, it could be walking through a shopping center and then you start to contemplate, you know, you see somebody who's acting similar to however this person is that's acting, and you discuss, you know, what might be happening for that person. You know, so you're generalizing it to get that dialogue going of understanding that thoughts create behaviors and that different perceptions create behaviors. And so really trying to understand firstly why they think that way, why it makes sense that we hate someone. Like, think about, why do you hate someone in the first place? And why have they taken on that emotion towards that person? And then trying to help them see that person in a different way, or just accept the reality that that person is who they are, and they get, and our conversations about, we get to decide how we feel, that's independent of someone else's behavior. So we want to kind of bring that into conversation as well. And I get that when I'm saying this, I'm not just talking about one conversation here. I'm talking about the culture of looking at life in a certain way, of being able to become responsible for our own emotions, and being able to look at why we think the way that we think, why we feel the way that we feel. That's not going to happen in one conversation. That's going to be by looking at different situations and talking about it, highlighting it, paying attention to how we're perceiving things, and repetitively creating that dialogue of looking at things differently, and not always making it about their experience. And that's why I mentioned we can look at a movie, and that can be a opportunity for us to discuss something. It can be looking at somebody in a shopping center. It can be discussing your own reactions that says, you know, sometimes I have done this. Would you hate me? You know, like, what's the difference? You know, having those conversations that explores that emotion, rather than trying to go, oh my God, they're really fixated on hating this person. How can I stop them doing that? It's not necessarily about stopping them doing that. It's understanding why they do it in the first place and changing their perception of people like that, because and also teaching that ownership of, you know, how we respond to people like that, whoever people like that are, understanding them and changing your response to them. And it's looking at that in all different angles, so we're not just talking about that person. Because if you're just trying to apply this stuff to that person that they already hate, there's so much momentum in there, there's so much emotional backlog in there, that it can just trigger that shutdown, especially in PDA, because there's that pressure that I have to feel a different way, but I don't. So we're just generalizing it out of context and creating a different dialogue, and, you know, building upon that dialogue, so eventually we can start to link that to how they feel about that person that they're hating. So there's a lot of, this is why that super framework that I was talking about is so helpful, because there's a lot of things that we're doing externally and out of context that then helps your child to work with some of the challenges that they're experiencing in context, if that makes sense. All right, guys, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your attention. Really appreciate you guys being here. Hope you guys have gotten a lot out of this webinar. If you have any questions, please reach out to us, and we can help you in whatever way we can. Hope that I get to see you guys on a future program or in future webinars. So have a great evening. Take care, and bye for now.